Hi, I'm Milas. They called me a burden as I lay torn open in that hospital bed, my blood still on their hands, whispering to the doctor to take what was left of me for my brother. They didn't know I was awake, hearing every word. But what's worse than fighting for your life alone? Knowing your family wants you dead and they almost got what they wanted. Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have done what I did next? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from right now? Drop a comment. I read every single one. I was tracing the silver chain of my grandmother's bracelet, the metal cool under my thumb, as rain smacked against the windshield like a constant, anxious drum. My brother Lior's voice was buzzing beside me, something about an internship, how Mom thought it would straighten him out. I kept nodding, even if I wasn't really there, my mind drifting to the smell of the wet pavement, to the fact that I still needed to finish my final essay for medical ethics. That bracelet had always been a small promise, something to hold on to when the world around me spun too fast. My grandmother used to say it would protect me, that it was a reminder to keep breathing even when people tried to steal your air. I remember her hand, fragile and warm, closing my fingers around it the day she died. I clung to that memory as I glanced at Lior, who was laughing at some text on his phone. It all happened so quickly. The flash of red light, the blur of a speeding truck, the jolt that rattled through my bones when Lior swerved hard, tires shrieking in protest. The sound of metal screaming, glass exploding, the sharp scent of gasoline cutting through the rain. The world didn't slow down, it just stopped, and in that single breath, everything went black. When I came back to myself, the world was buzzing with a sterile hum, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering in a cold rhythm that matched the beeping near my head. I couldn't move. The sheets felt heavy, my body felt heavier, pain cutting up from my side in jagged, white-hot lines. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry, my lips cracked. My voice didn't work, only a small, guttural noise that escaped and surprised me with how broken it sounded. A nurse noticed. She glanced at me, her eyes widening just slightly before she composed herself, pressing the call button with quick, efficient fingers. I wanted to ask where I was, where Lior was, but my tongue felt like sand. And all I could do was stare at the ceiling, at the cracked tile, at the dirt in the corner of the light panel, trying to remember how I got here. The door opened and I smelled my parents before I saw them. Vera's sharp perfume, something heavy and sweet that stuck to the air like syrup. Rowan's cologne, clean and cold, a reminder of the way he used to hug me once, long ago before I became invisible to them. They walked in, not rushing, not crying, no soft whispers, no, "Honey, you're okay." Just footsteps, the shuffle of papers, the clear, detached way Mom said, "She's awake," to the doctor standing by my side. She didn't even look at me, didn't touch my hand, didn't check if I was really there. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes fixed somewhere above my head, like he was already bored of being here. I tried to lift my hand, reaching for them, for anything, but the IV tugged at my skin, and my arm fell back, useless, the weight of their absence heavier than the stitches pulling at my side. The doctor murmured something, a reassuring tone that felt distant, like it was meant for someone else. I heard the words stable, surgery, lost a kidney. My brain struggled to catch up, but my heart already knew something had been taken from me, and no one was asking how I felt about it. I turned my head, every inch an agony, searching for the bracelet that wasn't there. They must have taken it off in the ER, or maybe it was gone forever. The emptiness on my wrist felt like a betrayal, a promise broken, leaving me with nothing to hold on to. Then her voice cut through everything, clear, dismissive, like I was a smudge on a window she was tired of cleaning. "She's just a burden anyway." The words didn't echo. They embedded themselves, sinking in deeper than any scalpel, finding a home in the spaces where love should have lived. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the beeping of the monitor too loud, too steady. I couldn't cry. I didn't have the strength. But somewhere inside me, a quiet promise formed, stronger than the bracelet, stronger than the fear trying to crush me. If I survive this, I won't be their burden ever again. That thought whispered through my mind as I lay in that hospital bed, days after the crash, staring at the ceiling tiles above me. Counting them was the only way to keep myself from drowning in the pain that came every time I moved, every time I tried to take a deep breath. Each inhale felt like glass scraping against my ribs, but I kept breathing because I had to. They hadn't come back much since that day I woke up. A nurse would peek in, adjust something on the IV, and leave again, leaving me alone with the steady beep of the monitor that reminded me I was still here, even if it felt like I shouldn't be. I would have given anything to roll over, to turn my back on the door, but my body didn't listen to me. So I lay there, blinking at the shadows from the hallway lights crawling across the thin blanket, the cold air biting at my face. It was late, the kind of late where the world outside the hospital felt like it belonged to someone else. The hallway had quieted, the soft voices of the nurses replaced by the hum of machines and the distant squeak of a rolling cart. My eyes were closed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I heard them. Their voices came first, low, like they thought if they whispered, the walls would swallow their words, but I heard every syllable, each one cutting deeper than the last. "So, you're saying if we take her other kidney—" That was my mother's voice, sharp and cold, like the click of her heels on the hospital floor. "She wouldn't survive that," the doctor's voice, firm but tired. "But Lior needs it. He has a future." My father's voice, calm, reasonable, like he was talking about replacing a part in the family car. "Not my life. She's just a burden anyway. This would be her contribution." Mom's words hung in the air, heavier than the smell of antiseptic that filled the room. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body froze, my breath caught, but the tears came, soaking into the pillow, silent so they wouldn't know I was awake, that I was hearing every single word. My chest felt like it was caving in, but I kept quiet, swallowing the scream building in the back of my throat. They would let me die for him, for Lior, who barely visited, who had everything handed to him, who didn't have to fight for a single breath in this world. That night, I learned what it meant to be alone in a way I hadn't understood before. I had known they loved him more, that he was the golden child, the boy with the future, the boy worth every sacrifice. But I never thought they would take that final step, that they would stand outside my door and plan to end me to save him. And I was worth so little to them that they didn't even bother to make sure I was asleep. I lay there until the hallway lights dimmed further, until the nurse's shoes padded softly past, until the world around me turned into a hum I could barely hear over the pounding in my ears. I fell asleep at some point, exhaustion pulling me under, but it wasn't restful. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, her mouth twisting with impatience, heard her saying, this would be her contribution. When morning came, the room was bright with the gray light of another rainy day in Tacoma. The door opened, and I turned my head, hoping for anyone else, a nurse, the doctor, but it was her. Vera stepped in, wearing a cream blouse and that tired expression she always wore around me, the one that said she'd rather be anywhere else. She adjusted the strap of her purse, pushing her sunglasses up onto her head, and I saw it. The ring. Gold. Heavy, with a small diamond set into it, catching the light as she moved. I knew that ring. She had shown it to me once in a magazine, said it was too expensive, that it would be irresponsible to spend that much when we had bills, when Lior needed college savings. But here it was, on her hand, glinting like a quiet confession she didn't care if I heard. I knew then what paid for that ring, the insurance money from the accident, from me, from the body that was still healing, still hurting, still fighting to breathe. It was like being punched, but there was no air left to lose. She noticed me looking, but she didn't hide it. She just looked at me, her lips tightening like she was about to say something, but then she turned away, checking her phone instead. She didn't stay long. She never did. She muttered something about checking in with the doctor, about needing to see how Lior was doing, and she was gone, leaving the faint scent of her perfume in the room, sweet and suffocating. I turned my face to the wall, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin, holding it like it was the only thing tethering me to the world. My chest burned, but I didn't cry again. I let the silence wrap around me, let it press against my ears until all I could hear was my heartbeat, reminding me that I was still here. They never planned to save me, I whispered to myself, barely a breath, but it felt like truth, heavy and sharp. I was never theirs to love. That was the day I decided they would never have another piece of me. Whatever they wanted, whatever they expected, I would never give it to them. They could take the insurance money, the sympathy of neighbors, the comfort of telling themselves they did what they had to do for Lior. But they would not take the rest of me. Not my spirit. Not my future. As the rain tapped softly against the window, I let my eyes close, the words echoing in my mind, stronger than the pain, stronger than the fear. They will never have another piece of me. I stared out the window as the rain pressed against the glass, fine lines of water tracing paths I could almost memorize if I let myself watch long enough. The promise I made to myself hadn't faded. It became the quiet engine that kept me going while I lay in that hospital bed, counting breaths and measuring pain against the weight of betrayal I couldn't shake off. They will never have another piece of me. The hospital felt colder now, or maybe it was just me noticing it for the first time. Nurses moved through the hallways, the soft squeak of shoes and rustling of charts breaking the silence. But nobody stopped by unless they had to. I didn't get visitors anymore, not from them. My mother hadn't come back since she flashed that ring, and my father's last words were just reminders that Lior had a future, and I was the footnote to his story. I'd lie there, watching the morning light shift across the tiles, the drizzle outside refusing to let up, pressing the grayness into everything. No one told me what day it was unless I asked, and even then, they said it softly, like they were telling me I didn't need to care about the days passing. Sometimes I caught the nurses glancing at me, whispering as they moved past, words like, "the kidney girl," floating in the air like ash that settled on my skin. They thought I didn't hear, but I did. I heard everything now. It's what happens when the world goes quiet around you, and you have nothing but your mind to keep you company. It was late morning when a social worker came in, a polite smile on her lips as she handed me a clipboard with insurance papers to sign. She spoke softly, like she was afraid I'd break if she raised her voice, explaining something about updating records, making sure the paperwork was clean so the hospital could continue billing properly. I nodded, signing where she pointed, my hand trembling from weakness. She left the room, and I tried to find sleep again, pulling the thin blanket over my shoulders. That's when I heard them. 2 nurses, just outside, speaking in voices low enough that they probably thought it was safe. "I heard the payout from her accident came through last week." "Yeah, the parents had it redirected for family needs. You know how that goes." "She doesn't even know, does she?" "Guess not. Poor thing." I stopped breathing for a moment, the words digging deeper than the IV in my arm ever could. They'd taken it. Whatever money came from the wreck that nearly killed me, they had taken it, used it for themselves, for him, for Lior, for family needs. Not my needs, not the medication that made the pain bearable, not the therapy I'd need if I ever walked again without a limp. It was theirs now, and I was just the excuse they used to get it. Later that afternoon, a nurse came in to check on me, her steps softer than the others. She was older, with hair pinned back in a careful bun, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much to judge anyone. She glanced at the monitor, adjusted my IV, and then, as if she felt the heaviness in the room, she sat down beside me. "I'm Isolde Sanders," she said, her voice calm, wrapping around the silence like a blanket. "You've been quiet." I didn't say anything, didn't know what to say. My eyes burned, but I didn't let the tears fall. She saw it anyway, and she reached out, taking my hand in hers, warm and steady. "They may think you're invisible," she said, squeezing my fingers gently. "But you're here. You're alive. Don't let them take that too." It was the first time in weeks that someone looked at me and saw me, not a patient, Not an inconvenience, not a burden, not a future donor. Just me. She left, and the room felt different, softer somehow, even as the rain continued to beat against the window. Her words sank into me, working their way into the spaces where hopelessness used to live. And I thought about all the times I'd chosen silence, all the moments I let myself be the shadow in the room so Lior could shine, so my mother could smile without seeing me, so my father wouldn't have to explain why his daughter didn't fit the perfect mold they wanted. I thought about the times I cleaned up the messes they left behind, stayed up late doing chores while Lior got praised for putting his plate in the sink, the way I swallowed my words because peace was easier than honesty. They had erased me from their future, removed me from the paperwork, the plans, the inheritance. They decided I wasn't worth a place at the table, but I was still here. And that was something they couldn't take. I turned toward the window, watching the rain smear the city into gray streaks, pressing my hand to the cool glass as if I could touch the world waiting on the other side. For the first time, I let the anger feel like warmth instead of poison, let it remind me that I was alive. I won't disappear. Not for them. The words were quiet, but they were mine, and they were true. As the day darkened into evening, I closed my eyes, feeling the slow drip of the IV, the hum of the monitor, the quiet promise in my chest beating louder than the storm outside. I need to get out before they try again. The thought pressed against my mind like a heartbeat as dawn crawled across the edge of the blinds, turning the room from gray to pale yellow. Rain tapped against the window, steady and soft, but my chest felt tight, like each drop was a reminder I didn't have much time. Nurse Sanders' words stayed with me, a quiet echo that didn't fade when the monitors beeped or when the IV pump clicked in the silence. Don't let them take that too. I was awake in ways I hadn't been before, seeing how every visit, every call, every document signed without my name on it was another way they tried to erase me. A message pinged on the nurse station's computer just after 6, lighting up the screen in the hallway where I could see it from my bed. My mother's name, requesting updates on my vitals, oxygen levels, fluid intake. She didn't ask me, she never did. It was always about control, about knowing just enough to twist things to fit her plans. Around mid-morning, the door opened, and my father walked in without knocking, the scent of his aftershave arriving before he did. He didn't glance at me, didn't ask how I was feeling, just placed a stack of discharge papers on the tray at the foot of my bed and signed them with the same bored precision he used to sign credit card slips. "Doctor says you can go home tomorrow," he said, adjusting the collar of his jacket before checking his phone. "We'll need to talk about helping your brother transition when he gets home." He didn't wait for me to answer before leaving. The door clicked shut, leaving the air heavier than before, pressing down on my chest as I stared at the papers he left behind. They were planning my release for Lior's benefit. Another sacrifice I was expected to make without question. I waited until the next nurse came in, a young woman with tired eyes who hummed under her breath while checking the IV line. Her hands were gentle, but she didn't look at me until I cleared my throat, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can I talk to the hospital social worker, please? I don't feel safe." Her eyes met mine, and something passed between us, a flicker of understanding, a promise she wouldn't say out loud. She nodded once before leaving the room quietly, shutting the door softly behind her. I spent the next hour counting the breaths it took for the social worker to arrive. Astria. She had dark curls pulled into a bun and a calmness in her eyes that made me want to believe her before she even spoke. She pulled a chair up beside my bed, folding her hands over her notebook. "You asked to see me?" My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "They're trying to take me home, but it's not safe. I overheard them. They want to take my other kidney for my brother. They took the insurance money from my accident. They don't see me as a person, just a thing to use." She didn't interrupt, just nodded, her eyes soft but clear. "Thank you for telling me, Melis. I believe you. We will protect you." The promise in her voice settled into the hollow space in my chest where fear had been building. I didn't cry, didn't let myself fall apart. Instead, I gripped the thin blanket with both hands and nodded, letting the silence speak for me. That evening, as the sun began to dip, painting the hallway in shades of orange and purple, I heard the familiar click of heels and the rustle of my mother's purse before I saw her through the glass. She was arguing with the security guard, her finger jabbing the air as she demanded to see me. "She's my daughter! Let me in! She's lying about us!" Her voice was sharp, slicing through the quiet wing of the hospital. The security guard stood firm, shaking his head as he blocked the door. "Ma'am, you need to step back. Don't you dare tell me what to do. She's ours. She's trying to ruin this family." Behind her, my father stood with his arms crossed, his face cold and tight, his eyes not on me but on the glass, like he was trying to see through it and control me with nothing but his glare. I watched them from my bed, the chaos outside the glass, the way her hands slammed against it, the way her words twisted around the truth. It was like watching strangers, people I used to know but couldn't recognize anymore. In that moment, the fear shifted into something else, a cold clarity that settled over me like a blanket. They never loved me. They only needed what I could give, and when I was empty, I was nothing to them. The nurses and the social workers stood near me, their presence a quiet wall of protection. I didn't need to move. I didn't need to shout back. I just watched as the security guard led my mother away, her screams muffled as the hallway swallowed her voice. I breathed in, and for the first time in too long, the air didn't taste like fear. It felt like mine. "If they want to fight," I whispered to myself as the glass door slid shut, "I'll give them one, but on my terms." I closed my eyes as the noise outside faded, the monitor beside me humming softly in the room that felt like it finally belonged to me. "This is the first day of my freedom." Those words kept me upright as I stepped outside the hospital, air brushing against my skin in a way that felt both sharp and alive. Isolde had handed me a small plastic bag holding my paperwork and the silver bracelet that once belonged to my grandmother, the only piece of my past I chose to carry. She hugged me, soft and quick, whispering, "Don't forget who you are," before letting go, her hands squeezing my shoulders like a quiet promise that I wasn't alone, even if it felt like I was. The hospital doors slid shut behind me with a hiss, sealing in the echoes of my mother's screaming and my father's cold stare. I pulled the thrift store cardigan tighter around me, taking slow steps toward the bus stop, my legs weak but moving, reminding me that I was still here. The ride across town felt endless, every stop jerking my body, every turn reminding me how fragile I had become. I watched the rain smear the city lights into blurry lines, the world outside moving forward while I was just trying to figure out where to start. The transitional housing smelled like bleach and old carpet, the kind of scent that stuck to your clothes. The staff handed me a thin blanket and pointed to a small room at the end of the hallway. The mattress was hard, the sheets rough, and a single lamp flickered with a low buzz when I turned it on. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment before walking over to the small window that overlooked the parking lot. Cars moved in and out, people living their lives, arguing, laughing, going places. I placed the bracelet on the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of reality pressing against me. They left me with nothing, I thought. No money, no family, no home that wanted me back. I was the burden they finally set down, walking away without looking back. And in the silence of that room, I felt small, so small that I could have disappeared and no one would have noticed. Later that evening, after unpacking the single change of clothes I owned, I caught my reflection in a cracked mirror above the dresser. The face staring back looked tired, hollow, scar running across my collarbone like a reminder of how close they came to taking everything. I touched it lightly, tracing the line before meeting my own eyes. "If they left me for dead, I'll live anyway," I whispered, the words thin but true, bouncing back at me from the glass. The next morning I woke up before dawn, the room cold, the air heavy with quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on my shoes, each movement slow as my body protested. I needed to find work, any work, something to keep me moving, to remind me I was alive and could make choices for myself. By noon, I found myself standing in front of a 24-hour bookstore, the sign flickering above the door. The manager, a tired man with a coffee stain on his shirt, glanced at me before handing me a mop. "Night shift starts at 8. You're paid in cash on Fridays," he said, not asking about my story or where I came from, and I was grateful for that. That first night was long, my body aching with each step as I cleaned the floors, wiped down shelves, and took out the trash. The smell of old paper and ink settled into my clothes, a scent that felt oddly comforting, reminding me of the afternoons I spent hiding in libraries, finding safety in stories. During my breaks, I used the small computer in the corner of the store to enroll in online GED courses, typing slowly with fingers that trembled from exhaustion but refused to stop. Each dollar I earned went into a jar hidden under my bed at the transitional housing, each coin a small promise to myself that I would never need to beg them for help again. One night, after finishing my shift, I walked through the quiet aisles, my hand brushing against the spines of the books lined up neatly, stories waiting for someone to believe in them. The store was empty, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound. "They can't erase me," I whispered to the darkness, the words rolling off my tongue, steady and calm. Locking up the store, I stepped into the early morning air, the sky still dark but soft with the promise of dawn. I held the bracelet in my hand, feeling the cold metal against my skin, and took a deep breath, letting it fill me in a way that felt different, fuller. Someday, they will know what I became. I held that promise in my chest as I slipped the key into the lock of my small shared apartment, the metal clicking louder in the quiet hallway than I expected. The air smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, and the thin carpet muffled the tired shuffle of my shoes as I walked to my room. 5 months had passed since I walked out of that hospital with nothing but a bracelet and a will to survive. Now I worked the night shift cleaning the bookstore, studied for my GED in the mornings at the library, and slept during the daylight hours, wrapped in blankets that could never quite keep the cold out. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Each day was stitched together with the same thread of exhaustion, but it was the exhaustion of effort, not the drain of being used. There was a rhythm to these days, a quiet isolation that kept me safe. I avoided calls and ignored blocked numbers that I suspected were them, letting them ring out until the silence returned. The scar on my side would tug when I moved too quickly, reminding me every day of how close they came to taking everything, and of how I had lived anyway. On a damp September morning, after a long shift at the bookstore, I came home to find my small closet falling apart, the cheap rod giving way under the few clothes I had managed to collect. As I pulled hangers off the ground, I noticed an envelope had fallen from a stack of papers stuffed in the corner. My name was written in careful script I recognized instantly, Astria. My breath caught as I sat down on the edge of my bed, the envelope light in my hands, but heavy with the weight of things unsaid. I opened it slowly, finding a small USB drive inside labeled Tacoma General Audio. There was also a folded note that smelled faintly of lavender, like Astria's clothes did when she hugged me goodbye. The library was nearly empty that afternoon, the low hum of the computers blending with the whispers of pages turning and the quiet footsteps of people passing by. I plugged the USB into a borrowed laptop, my fingers trembling as the file loaded. I pressed play. The first voice I heard was my mother's. "So you're saying if we take her other kidney—" The doctor's voice was muffled but clear enough. "She wouldn't survive that." Then my father's voice, calm, cold. "Lior has a future, she doesn't." And then her again with that tone I knew too well. "She's just a burden anyway." The sound of those words filled the small corner of the library where I sat, making the air feel tight around me. I didn't cry out. I didn't gasp. Tears slid down my cheeks in silence as I listened to the evidence of what I had always felt but never fully believed until now. They really meant it. I closed the file and stared at the screen, seeing my reflection in the dark monitor. My eyes were red, but they were clear. I pulled the note from Astria from my pocket and unfolded it, reading her handwriting again. When you're ready to protect yourself, this is yours to use. A. Ready. The word echoed inside me, challenging the fear that still tried to root itself in my bones. I slipped the USB back into my pocket, standing up slowly, my legs shaky from sitting too long. As I walked out of the library into the crisp fall air, the wind catching my hair, I let myself feel something that wasn't fear or exhaustion. I felt defiance. That night, I walked home from the bus stop, the streetlights painting pools of light on the cracked sidewalks. My shoes made soft sounds against the pavement as I passed dark houses, some windows glowing with the blue flicker of televisions, others dark and closed off to the world. I paused under a streetlight near the corner before my building, pulling the USB from my pocket and holding it tightly. My thumb brushed over the label as I looked up at the sky, the stars hidden behind a blanket of clouds that promised rain by morning. They tried to silence me, I whispered, the words carried away by the breeze. I will be the one to speak. The street was quiet, the world holding its breath, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't holding mine. It's time they learn I survived. That thought carried me every dawn as I unlocked the glass doors of the office, the scent of fresh coffee and faint printer ink filling the quiet air before the building came alive. I no longer flinched at the sound of doors opening behind me or checked the shadows in the reflection of the windows. I moved through the halls of the company I helped build, calm, deliberate, never rushing, but never yielding either. 3 years had passed since I left the hospital with nothing but a plastic bag and a scar that itched every time I pushed too hard in the gym. 3 years of quiet work, turning that survival into something real, something mine. I started at the bottom, learning systems, absorbing numbers, reading contracts while others were distracted. I rose not because I shouted, but because I saw everything they didn't. And now, at 26, I was co-owner and COO of a healthcare startup that protected the people no one else would. I kept a photo of my grandmother in my top drawer, right next to the USB drive that had changed everything. Sometimes, when the office was dark and I was the last one to leave, I would pull it out, letting the weight of it remind me who I had become and why. That morning, the HR notification pinged on my screen while I was reviewing supply chain reports. A new executive candidate had been pushed for fast-track interviewing by someone's recommendation, and the name in the subject line made my fingers pause on the keyboard. Lior Olin. I let out a slow breath, the room around me blurring for a moment before I blinked the fog away. My brother, the chosen one, the one who always had a future even if it meant mine ended. A small smile pulled at the corner of my mouth as I whispered to the empty office, "You found me." I clicked through to his resume. It was padded with empty titles, short stints at startups that folded, projects left unfinished, and a desperate tone in the final paragraph of his cover letter that practically pleaded for another chance. I pressed the intercom button for HR. "Schedule him for 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'll handle this one personally." That evening, I stayed late, clearing my desk and locking away the files I didn't need him to see. The rain was falling in steady lines against the windows as I stood looking out over the city lights. Tacoma had become my home, not because it was kind to me, but because I built my strength here, one quiet choice at a time. The world outside could take what it wanted, but it couldn't take me again. The next morning, the air was crisp as I stepped into the office early, setting down a second cup of coffee across from my seat in the glass-walled interview room. I pulled out the USB drive and placed it beside my notebook, its presence grounding me as the clock on the wall ticked closer to 8. The door opened, and Lior stepped in, looking older, heavier in the shoulders, his eyes darting around with the same restless energy I remembered from when we were kids. He didn't recognize me at first, his gaze sliding over me as just another executive in a gray blazer. Then I looked up, meeting his eyes, his face drained of color, mouth opening as he stammered, You're alive?" I nodded once, slowly, letting the silence stretch between us until he squirmed in his seat. I picked up the USB drive and turned it in my fingers before sliding it across the table to him. "Yes," I'm alive, and I remember everything you let them do." He didn't reach for it. His hands hovered, trembling before dropping to his lap as he swallowed hard. "Mylis, I didn't know they would—" "Save it," I interrupted, my voice even, cold but not cruel. "I don't need excuses." His eyes darted to the door, as if he was ready to run. I need a job, okay? Things haven't been easy." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my eyes never leaving his. This company was built to protect people who were betrayed by the ones they trusted most. We fight for those who are thrown away, and you, Lior, you're exactly what we protect people from. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. His shoulders slumped, and he looked smaller, deflated, like the man in the resume who had already failed too many times. I stood, collecting the USB and slipping it back into my pocket. "You will never work here. You will never work anywhere we can touch, and trust me, I can touch far." He stood slowly, blinking rapidly, and I could see the tears he was trying to hide. For a moment, I saw the boy he had been, the brother I once thought I had, before everything was stripped away by their greed. But I didn't let myself feel pity. I had survived them, and I would not let him back into a space I built on truth and protection. As he reached the door, he turned back, his voice breaking. "Mylis, I didn't know." I met his gaze calmly. "But you do now." He hesitated, then turned and left, the glass door closing softly behind him. I stood in the quiet, the morning sun catching on the edges of the buildings outside, reflecting off the glass and flooding the room with light. I breathed in deeply, feeling the air fill my lungs, feeling alive, whole, unbroken. This was the freedom I had fought for, and I would not let it go. This is only the beginning. The words were still warm on my lips as I closed the balcony door against the cool night air. The hum of the city below was distant, comforting in its constancy, while the waves of Commencement Bay shimmered under the glow of the moon, a reminder that life moved on whether I was watching or not. I spent the next 2 weeks in a quiet rhythm, rising early to walk along the waterfront before the sun broke fully over the horizon, the bracelet on my wrist a steady weight reminding me of where I came from and how far I had traveled to get here. The office was busy, growth targets to meet, teams to encourage, investors to assure, but each evening I returned to my small apartment overlooking the bay and allowed myself moments of silence, moments that reminded me of the freedom I had fought for. On one of those evenings, I stopped by the mailboxes in the lobby, sorting through advertisements and bills before a plain envelope caught my attention. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I knew that looped R and the way the letters leaned, a tilt that had once signed permission slips, grocery lists, birthday cards I kept long after they should have been discarded. My mother. I stood in the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming above me as I turned the envelope over in my hands, weighing the choice to open it or toss it away. Part of me wanted to shred it right there, to walk back upstairs and leave the past in the cold bin next to the recycling. But curiosity, or perhaps the final need for closure, won. Inside, her words were desperate, slanted across the paper like they were written in haste, or maybe in fear. "We are losing the house. Lior can't find work. We need your help. You're still our daughter." I closed my eyes, pressing the paper against my chest as if the pressure could stop the old ache from rising. They were losing the house. Lior was struggling, and now they remembered I existed, not as a daughter, not as someone to love, but as someone to save them. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, each gulp cold and grounding as I reminded myself who I was now. I wasn't the girl who waited for their approval, who bent until she broke trying to be enough. I was the woman who built a life from nothing, who survived when they were ready to let me die. The night was quiet, the clock ticking in steady beats that matched my breathing as I walked to my desk, sat down, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. My pen hovered for a moment before touching the page, my hand steady. I was your daughter when I was unconscious in a hospital bed. You chose your son. Now live with that choice." I read it once, twice, letting each word settle into place before folding the paper and slipping it into an envelope. I sealed it, running my thumb along the seam as if it could wipe away the years of wanting to be theirs. I didn't add a return address. They would know who it was from. The next morning, I dropped the letter into the mailbox on the corner, the metal flap closing with a satisfying finality. As I walked away, the weight I had carried for so long felt lighter, the burden of who I used to be slipping off my shoulders. Back in my apartment, I made a cup of coffee and stepped onto the balcony, the morning air crisp as I pulled my cardigan tighter around me. The bay sparkled in the early light, and I watched the gulls circle and dive, free, unbothered by the world below. I thought of them, my mother, my father, Lior, sitting in that house, waiting for me to save them, to prove once again that I was willing to give everything for their comfort. But I had given enough. I had given them my childhood, my trust, nearly my life. No more. As the sun lifted higher, warming my face, I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind. "It's over." I whispered it as I stepped back inside, closing the balcony door and letting the warmth of my small apartment hold me in its quiet embrace. The air smelled of the coffee I had brewed earlier, lingering, grounding me in the life I had carved out for myself, one choice at a time, one sunrise at a time. A few days later, I sat at my small kitchen table, laptop open, sorting through emails as the morning light crept across the floor. Most were the usual: team updates, partnership proposals, patient feedback from our platform. But one subject line froze me. New ethics initiative launch. The Claire Protection Protocol. My eyes scanned the email, reading how Tacoma General had adopted a new campaign to protect minors and vulnerable patients from parental coercion in organ donation cases. It was a preventative measure designed to ensure no one would ever be cornered the way I had been, and there it was, nestled within the text, bolded in quiet triumph, named in honor of Claire Olin. Claire Olin, my new name. The name I had chosen when I filed for a complete break, legally untying myself from them, building a life that was mine alone. Seeing it there, connected to a campaign that would save others, anchored something deep in me. It was the life I had built from the ashes of betrayal, and now it was a shield for others. I closed the laptop softly, letting the echo of my name on that screen settle around me like a comforting blanket. Rising, I slipped on a sweater and walked down the 2 flights of stairs to the sidewalk, the morning air cool against my skin as I made my way toward Commencement Bay. The dock was empty at this hour, the water gently lapping against the pilings, whispering to me of survival, of days that began again and again. I stood there, the bracelet of my grandmother warm against my wrist, feeling the breeze push back the strands of hair from my face. I kept living, even when they tried to end me. I spoke it softly, letting the words mix with the morning air. I knew there would always be nights when their voices returned, when I would hear them say I was nothing, a burden, disposable. Some wounds never fully close, no matter how much time or distance you put between yourself and the people who caused them. But those wounds no longer controlled me. I sat down on the edge of the dock, letting my legs dangle, shoes tapping lightly against the weathered wood, breathing in the salt and earth of the bay. In my mind, I saw the faces of those who had tried to break me, who had chosen comfort over my life, who had used the word daughter as a leash. I let them pass like clouds. Not for them, for me, because carrying that anger was heavy, and I had carried it long enough. It had fueled me, yes, had pushed me to survive, to build, to fight. But it was not the foundation I wanted for the rest of my life. I wanted to help others, to build dignity where there had been shame, to protect others from what I had endured. I wanted to live freely, not just exist in defiance. Standing, I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face as it rose higher, lifting the chill from the morning air. I held the bracelet tight, The memory of my grandmother's soft laughter, the way she called me her little flame, returning to me. I chose me, and I will keep choosing me. Turning, I walked back down the dock, each step firm, steady, as if the earth itself was holding me up. The city was waking as I moved through the streets, passing the coffee shop where the barista knew my order, the bookstore where I had once mopped floors, the clinic we had partnered with to expand patient care, my life, my choices. They would never take that from me. Back in my apartment, I set down my keys, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. The bay glistened in the sunlight, waves catching the light, a promise of new beginnings. I breathed deeply,